In the 19th century, the woman's place was considered in the home.
In the mid-1800s, we're starting to see middle and upper class women realizing their freedoms are limited.
Women had no right to their property, no right to any possessions. Of course they couldn't vote.
In the first half of the 19th century, women began demanding one of the fundamental tenets of democracy, the right to vote.
New York State is such a central space for a lot of this engagement to take place. There's so many women in New York who were all in for women's equality.
African-American women had been involved in the movement from the early days when they founded literary clubs like in Buffalo in 1830s and 1840s. Suffrage was always on the agenda. How can we improve the lives of our people?
This is a movement of 3 generations of women who demanded the right to be recognized as citizens.
Many of our visitors are surprised that there's a national park in the middle of Seneca Falls. They're not really certain why this location was so critical. Right now I'm standing right in front of Declaration Park. This is the site of the 1848 Women's Rights Convention.
The Women's Rights National Historical Park in Seneca Falls exemplifies the role of Central and Western New York in the women's suffrage movement.
I came here when I was 8 years old to the Elizabeth Cady Stanton home. It was the first opportunity that I had to realize that in the past, girls' lives were not like mine.
Before the women's rights movement, women had no legal existence.
So you could not serve on a jury, you could not own property, you could not keep your wages. You just weren't there.
In the 70 years between the Seneca Falls Convention and passage of the 19th Amendment, many women were involved in the fight to secure the right to vote.
No social movement can be boiled down to 2 or 3 people. There's so many women in New York who were all in for women's equality and who worked really, really hard to achieve their goals.
A lot of the story of women's rights and its origins can't be understood outside this central New York region.
In the 1830s, 40s, Central New York was benefiting tremendously by the building of the Erie Canal.
The Erie Canal was the information superhighway of the 19th century. So that made this region able to engage in radical ideas and radical thinking because ideas were spreading very quickly.
As we look back on any moment in history, it's important to recognize that we don't know everything that happened.
To make change, it takes thousands, if not millions of people, and it takes decades, even centuries. You have to recognize that it may not happen in your lifetime and that the work it takes is intense and extreme. You know, I think we can really admire their commitment to their cause and recognize the work.
One of the people that was really extraordinary and maybe a little too radical for her, for a lot of her colleagues, was Matilda Joslyn Gage.
Gloria Steinem says this is the woman who was ahead of the women who were ahead of their time.
Gage was born in 1826 in Cicero, New York, near the Erie Canal, at a time when women had few rights and no political voice.
Matilda Joslyn Gage called for an end to patriarchy. Gage says we're in the midst of a revolution. The result will be a regenerated world.
Gage's father was an abolitionist and activist who taught his daughter to think for herself.
So this is an empowered young woman, and this is unique at this time for a father to give his daughter that kind of voice.
In the mid-1800s, women held conventions around the country to promote the women's rights movement. Gage attended her first convention in 1852 in Syracuse. Only 26, Gage was the youngest speaker, but her impassioned speech drew attention.